Alright, Richie back here with your 3:30 games for week 2 for college football. Like I said, I have 3 different videos. We're going to try this out. Noon to 3:30, 3:30 to 7:30, and then 7:30 to the end. So, one of the big games of the day, of the weekend. Texas A&M taking on Clemson. Both ranked, both really good on offense. This was a game last year. Clemson only beat Texas A&M 28-26. Most people don't realize it was that close. A&M, their first game, they played Texas State. Kellen Mond, quarterback, 194, 3 touchdowns, a pick. They had 246 rushing yards. Running back Isaiah Spiller ran for 106. Jashawn Corbin ran for 103 yards and a touchdown and had a receiving touchdown. A&M had 4 interceptions. They only allowed 8 rushing yards. And they beat Texas State pretty easily. Clemson took on Georgia Tech pretty easily. Trevor Lawrence kind of struggled. He was only 13 of 23, 168, 1 touchdown. He threw 2 interceptions. He did run for 1, but Travis Etienne put himself right up there. And the Heisman ran for 205 yards and 3 touchdowns. This will be a great, great game. Then you got Central Michigan taking on Wisconsin. Central Michigan has former Gator and Colorado State head coach Jim McElwain. They did win their first game. They beat Albany, but they only won 1 game last year. They struggled on offense. They put up 38 points. Quarterback transferred Quentin Dormady. He transferred in from Tennessee. He passed for 285, 3 touchdowns. Running back Jonathan Ward ran for 158 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Jonathan Ward ran for 1,000 yards a couple of years ago. I forgot to say that in my previews last week. But Wisconsin, they dismantled USF. Running back Jonathan Taylor ran for 135 and 2 touchdowns and had 48 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns receiving. So he had 4 total touchdowns. Jack Cohn, he was solid. He passed for 199, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. And they rolled. So I think they should kind of continue that. All right, pretty interesting game. Nebraska and Colorado. Nebraska struggled quite a bit offensively versus South Alabama. They did win 35-21, but only 14 of those points were from the offense. They had a pick 6, a fumble return for a touchdown, and their receiver / punt returner J.D. Spielman had a 76-yard punt return for a touchdown. Quarterback Adrian Martinez, he only threw for 178 yards, threw 1 interception, only ran for 6 yards, which he's a very good dual threat quarterback. You should hear a lot about him this year. He was a freshman last year and played great. Not so much in this game. Nebraska only had 98 rushing yards, but their defense, like I said, they had the 2 defensive touchdowns. They had 4 sacks. They're taking on Colorado, who started 5-0 last year, then lost their 7 games. They played Colorado State their first game. They beat him well on head coach Mel Tucker's debut as a head coach anywhere. Steven Montez threw for 232, 2 touchdowns. Running back Alex Fontenot ran for 125 and 3 touchdowns. Their defense forced 4 turnovers. They had 1 fumble return for a touchdown. So this will be a really interesting game. Nebraska, if they don't get their offense straight, then they might lose this one. This one's very, very even. All right, 1AA Southern Illinois taking on UMass. UMass, they lost to Rutgers 48-21, but they did run for 186 yards. Their defense did have 3 interceptions versus Rutgers, and I think they should bounce back here. Charlotte 49ers taking on Appalachian State. Charlotte, they had a quarterback Chris Reynolds and Brett Keane. They combined for 2 touchdowns, but they threw 3 interceptions. Chris Reynolds had 1 passing touchdown, but he ran for 2. They did have 322 rushing yards as a team versus Gardner Webb. Running back Benny LeMay ran for 120 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their defense had 5 sacks, and they had a blocked punt return for a touchdown. And then Charlotte, they're relatively new to football. Their program only started like 9 years ago, something like that, 8, whatever. But Appalachian State's one of those teams. They moved up to 1A only like 6 years ago, but they pretty much run roughshod through the Sun Belt. And they started again. Yeah, they played 1AA team. Quarterback Zach Thomas passed for 150 and 2 touchdowns, which they don't do a lot of passing. Not exactly a triple option team, but they rely a lot on their running game, and evidenced by running back Darrington Evans ran for 99 yards and a touchdown, and they ran for 277 rushing. But they're usually pretty balanced. Like I said, Zach Thomas ran for 150 and 2, but he also ran for 32 yards and a touchdown. Appalachian, I'm kind of leading App State, but we'll see how Charlotte is this year. 1AA Grambling taking on Louisiana Tech. Louisiana Tech, they lost big to Texas, but their quarterback Jamar Smith did pass for 331 yards and 2 touchdowns and a pick. They only ran for 73 rushes. Part of that is because they got down pretty early to Texas, and I think they bounced back here. Richmond Spiders, 1AA team, usually one of the better 1AA teams. They're taking on Boston College. Boston College had a huge early ACC victory against Virginia Tech in their first game. Quarterback Anthony Brown passed for 275, 2 touchdowns, and had a rushing touchdown. Running back A.J. Dillon, one of the best in the country. He was kind of held to only 81 yards rushing and a touchdown. And I say only because he's one of the best in the country. He should have 100 every game. Their defense had 3 interceptions. They only allowed 98 rushing yards, and they should continue winning here. All right, a kind of weird non-conference matchup. Illinois versus UConn. Illinois came out really well their first game against Akron. They won 42-3 behind Brandon Peters, who's the quarterback transfer in from Michigan. He passed for 163, 3 touchdowns. He added 36 rushing yards and 1 touchdown. They had 207 rushing yards as a team. Their defense had 6 sacks, and they rolled on that. UConn, they struggled with Wagner. Their first game, 1AA Wagner. They only won 24-21, and pretty much if they want to, I'm kind of leaning towards Illinois, but if UConn wants a shot, they should lean on their running game. Their running back, Kevin Mensah, he did run for 144 yards and a touchdown. He ran for 1,000 yards last year. And their team did run for 234 as a whole team. So maybe if they get that going, they can keep it close. Who knows, but I don't really know. Like I said, I'm kind of leaning towards Illinois, but I have no idea how this game's going to go. All right, Eastern Illinois taking on Indiana. Indiana had a decent first game against Ball State. They won 34-24. Michael Penix started over their quarterback, Peyton Ramsey, who started pretty much all last season. And Penix wasn't too bad. He threw for 326. He touchdown pass. He did throw 2 picks, so he's got to clean that up. But he added 67 rushing yards, so it was a pretty good dual threat. Wide receiver Nick Westbrook had 3 catches for 103 and a touchdown, so that's a pretty solid receiver there. He's been there for a while. All right, this is an interesting non-conference matchup, I think. Southern Miss is taking on Mississippi State, and Southern Miss is a team in the CUSA. They used to be kind of like what Boise was back in the 90s. They would kind of upset these better, quote, teams, even though they run a lower conference or whatever. And Mississippi State, they struggled their first week against Louisiana Lafayette. Louisiana Lafayette is a pretty good team from the Sun Belt. They played in the Sun Belt Championship last year. And Mississippi State did beat them, but they only beat them 38-28, and it was back and forth most of that game. They scored a field goal late to get that 10-point lead. Quarterback Jack Abraham actually he was hurt part of last year, but he led the country last season with 73% completion percentage. He had a pretty solid game back, 293 passing, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. They only had 96 rushing yards. Wide receiver Jordan Mitchell, 7 catches, 133. Defense had 5 sacks. But the key in their game was their return man, Jalen Adams. He had an 89-yard kick return for a touchdown and an 80-yard punt return for a touchdown. So 1 kick return, 1 punt return for a touchdown in the same game. And against Mississippi State, that means if Southern Miss defense hold Mississippi State to punts, that's dangerous. Or even if Mississippi State does score, it's still a dangerous possibility of having somebody return like that. Quarterback Tommy Stevens for Mississippi State transferred from Penn State. He passed for 236, 2 touchdowns, ran for 37 and a touchdown. Running back Callahan did run all over Louisiana Lafayette, 197 rushing and a touchdown, and then 261 rushing. So this is I think Mississippi State probably should win, but this is a really pretty interesting game. Mississippi State should not look past them. All right, New Mexico State taking on Alabama. New Mexico State got pummeled by Washington State, 58-7. Quarterback Josh Haskins threw for 221, but 2 interceptions. They only had 96 rushing yards. Alabama started slow against Duke, but then they won 42-3. Tua Tagovailoa, 26-31, 331, 4 touchdowns. Wide receiver Jerry Jeudy, 10 receptions, 137 and a touchdown. They shouldn't struggle here. 1AA Murray State taking on Georgia. Georgia kind of struggled a little against Vandy. They did win 30-6, but they didn't look that great. Fromm was fine. Running back DeAndre though ran for 147. They ran for 323 and should keep it going. All right, UTSA and Baylor. This is another kind of sneaky possible game. UTSA did win their first game against Incarnate Ward. Their offense didn't look very good last year, and yes, it's Incarnate Ward, but they didn't look bad this year. They have a quarterback, Frank Harris. He passed for 206, 3 touchdowns and a pick, and ran for 123 yards. So he's a really good dual threat guy. They ran 284 as a team. They had 4 sacks. And then Baylor, they beat Stephen F. Austin pretty handily. It was like 56-14, something like that. Charlie Brewer passed for 199, 3 touchdowns. Running back John Lovett, it stinks. Ran for 108 yards and a touchdown. They had 268 rushing. I'm kind of leaning towards Baylor here, but if UTSA's quarterback can kind of take off a little bit, maybe they keep it close. Western Illinois taking on Colorado State. Colorado State did lose to Colorado, but they put up 31 points. Quarterback Colin Hill did pass for 374 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 picks, and should reverse their losing there and win that. All right, San Diego State. God, they had a terrible first game. Juwan Washington was only held to 55 rushing yards. Luckily their defense is good and only allowed 154 total yards. And San Diego State did beat 1AA Weber, but 6-0. They had 2 field goals. And they're taking on UCLA, who lost to Cincinnati. I thought they'd be better this year. I don't know. Their quarterback, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, passed for 156, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. Running back Joshua Kelly is a question mark. He didn't play versus Cincinnati. Don't know if they will be back. They only had 218 total yards. I think they kind of reversed this. San Diego State's always a really good Mountain West team, but that first game, they did not look good. So, honestly, who knows about this game? I'm kind of leaning towards UCLA a little bit, just because UCLA at least put up 14 points, and maybe they could win 14-6. That's a weird one. All right, 1-0 Northern Colorado taking on Washington State. Man, Washington State, their quarterback Anthony Gordon, he sat the last 2 years as a backup. He's a senior this year. He is named a starter, and it's kind of like what Mike Leach did at Texas Tech. There's a point where they 3 years in a row they had a senior step in, throw for 4,000 yards and 40 whatever touchdowns, and Anthony Gordon started it right away. The first half he was 22 of 23 with 4 touchdowns. He ended the game 29-35, 420 passing, 5 passing touchdowns. Running back Max Borghi had 128 yards rushing and a touchdown. Wide receiver Desmond Patton had 7 catches, 103 and a touchdown. And then they rolled, and I think they continue there. Louisiana Monroe taking on Florida State. Louisiana Monroe had a solid first game against the 1AA Grambling. Quarterback Caleb Evans, 183 passing, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. Running back Jabbar Johnson did go off for 173 rush yards and 2 touchdowns. They ran for 315. And FSU, they were up 31-13 at one point in Boise State. Boise State came back with a true freshman, Hank Bachmeier, at quarterback. They lost, and FSU lost 36-31. Quarterback Blackman and his new offense by offensive coordinator Kendall Browse put up some nice numbers, 327 and 3 touchdowns, but he was kind of inconsistent. First half he was great, second half they were shut out, and he was like 9 of 16 second half. Running back Cam Akers ran for 116 and a touchdown. Their D had 6 sacks, but they still allowed 621 yards of offense versus Boise. I think Florida State should probably bounce back in this one against ULM. All right, 1AA North Carolina A&T taking on Duke. Duke was terrible versus Bama. The quarterback Quentin Harris was only 12 of 22 for 97 yards, 2 picks. They only had 107 rushing yards. They didn't do a whole lot of good. I expected them to bounce back here. Gardner-Webb taking on ECU. I picked ECU to upset NC State. I was way off. They only had 41 rushing yards. They lost 34-6. Holden Ahlers, he was okay at quarterback, but I think they probably should be able to bounce back a little bit here. 1AA Maine taking on Georgia Southern. Georgia Southern, I thought they could keep it close against LSU. They were only held to 98 total yards of offense. They're a triple option team. Their quarterback Shea Wertz was hurt, but I don't think that would have stopped them. It depends on their quarterback situation how hurt Shea Wertz is, but I do expect them to at least bounce back here. All right, so next we got South Dakota, 1AA South Dakota taking on the Oklahoma Sooners. Oklahoma played a really tough Houston team with a good quarterback, Derek King, and lit it up. They won 49-31. Jalen Hurts, the transfer from Alabama, he might be the third Heisman winner in a row from Oklahoma. All he did was pass for 332 yards and 3 touchdowns, and ran for 176 yards and 3 touchdowns. He had over 500 yards of offense himself. The Oklahoma team gained 686 total yards and had 686 total yards. They had rushed for 354 yards. Wide receiver Charleston Rambo had 3 receptions, 105 yards and a touchdown, and should make quick work of South Dakota. You got UCF taking on Florida Atlantic. UCF, yes, they played Florida A&M the first game, but they did win 62-0. And if you're, and especially compared to, there were a lot of ranked teams this weekend that did not look like they should be ranked. One of them, Iowa State, took Northern Iowa, one AA team, to triple overtime and barely beat them. And they had 3 quarterbacks here. Quarterback Brandon Wimbush, the transfer from Notre Dame, he had the kind of game I thought, like, he came in and I'm like, he's not much different than the backup DJ Mack, because Mackenzie Milton, the quarterback for UCF, is hurt. He's not playing this year, and Wimbush is, yeah, he can rush a lot, but he's not the most accurate passer. And there are 3 times in that game, he had a wide open guy streaking down the field that he should have hit for touchdowns. Milton would have hit at least 2 of them for touchdowns. And he wasn't, but he was fine overall. He's got to get that accuracy there against teams like Stanford and Houston and all those guys, like in Cincinnati. You got to hit those. That being said, he was 12 of 23, 168 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns. Their true freshman Dylan Gabriel, one of the highest recruits ever to go to UCF, broke all of Mackenzie Milton's Hawaii records. He came in 9 of 13, 127, 3 touchdowns. He was better than Wimbush. And then their third string quarterback got on the action, Quadri Jones. He was 2 for 2, 61 yards and a touchdown pass. Running back Killens ran for 106 yards and a touchdown. They ran for 338 as the team had 694 total yards. Florida Atlantic, though, took on Ohio State. They lost 45-21. They only had 22 rushing yards, and it wasn't really all that even that close. They only lost 45-21, but it looked worse. Furman, Vanderbilt taking on Georgia State. Georgia State's coming off a huge upset against Tennessee. Yeah, Tennessee wasn't ranked. They kind of sucked, but it's Tennessee. They're an SEC team. It was at Rocky Top in Neyland Stadium. Georgia State beat them 38-30. Quarterback Dan Ellington, he was 11 of 24, which isn't great, but he passed for 139, 2 touchdowns, added 61 rushing and a touchdown. They ran for 213 as a team. And they had 4 sacks in the game, and I think they go to 2-0. Who knows? Maybe they get a bowl this year. 1AA Jackson State taking on USA, South Alabama. South Alabama they lost to Nebraska 35-21, but they held the Nebraska offense to only 14 points and 276 total yards. Nebraska had 21 points, 2 defensive touchdowns and a special teams touchdown. Quarterback Cephas Johnson passed for 231, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks, and had a rushing touchdown. So he played pretty well. Yeah, one of the picks was returned, but he played well enough. They were down actually 28-7, and they made it 28-21. So he brought him back, and they should win this one. All right, Wyoming and Texas State. Wyoming coming off a pretty good upset against a SEC Missouri team. Wyoming beat him 37-31. They had 297 rushing yards. Quarterback Sean Chambers didn't do a whole lot passing, but he ran for 120 and a touchdown. Running back Xavier Holiday ran for 118 and a touchdown. In that win, and Texas State took on Texas A&M. They got pummeled. They're trying this new air raid offense with the new coach, Jake Spavital. I think they'll get it going, but not that game. They only had 8 rushing yards. They had 2 quarterbacks, Gress Jensen, who was a transfer from Montana, and Tyler Vitt. They combined for 4 interceptions. I think they'll do a little better in this game against Wyoming. I'm kind of leaning Wyoming. All right, Western Kentucky and Florida International. Western Kentucky had a stupid loss. They were up a bit on Central Arkansas and then lost 35-28. Quarterback Stephen Duncan passed for 304, 1 touchdown, but he threw 2 picks. Running back Gage Walker did run for 152 and 2 touchdowns in the loss. But they have a new head coach, and their offense actually looked even though they lost, they looked good in that game. And they were terrible last year. Florida International had a disappointing loss, I thought, to Tulane. They only lost 40. They lost 42-14. They allowed 350 rushing yards. Quarterback James Morgan had 208 passing, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. They only had 59 rushing yards. This will be a pretty even game. It's an early CUSA matchup. I'm in Florida. I like the Florida teams. I'm rooting for Florida International, but honestly, don't. This is an even one. Tennessee State won everybody taking on Middle Tennessee State. Middle Tennessee State kept it close versus Michigan. It was only they were only down 10-7 in the first quarter. Quarterback Asher O'Hara passed for 217, 2 touchdowns a pick, ran for 32 yards and a touchdown. They only had 67 rushing yards in that, but I do think they actually didn't play that badly. And they may make a bowl and they could start here. All right, North Texas says SMU. I'm kind of excited about this one. I think this will be a shootout. It should be great. North Texas, they beat Abilene Christian 51-31, but they were up like 38-0 really early and kind of cruised. Quarterback Mason Fine, one of the best quarterbacks in the country, passed for 383, 4 touchdowns a pick. Running back DeAndre Torrey had 95 rushing yards and a touchdown. They had 192 rushing yards total. Wide receiver Rico Bussey Jr., 4 catches, 156 and a touchdown. Wide receiver Jason Pirtle had 3 touchdown receptions. They had 575 yards of offense, and they had a kick return. Dion Hare Griffin had a 96-yard kick return TD, which is significant because SMU, they won their game against Arkansas State 37-30. It was a shootout, kind of like what I expected. Quarterback transferred from Texas, Shane Buechele. He threw for 360. He didn't throw any touchdowns, threw a pick because they leaned on their rushing game. Running back Xavier Jones had 3 rushing touchdowns. Wide receiver Reggie Roberson had 11 catches for 180 yards, and he's not even their best receiver. James Proche is. And then they had CJ Sanders, 98-yard kick return TD. So this is a weird because both kick returners had kick return touchdowns in their games. And if this is a shootout like I expect, I mean, there could be scores every time. You could have a passing touchdown, then the kick return goes for a touchdown, and that kick return goes for a touchdown. Like, who the hell knows what's going on? So, like, that should be an exciting, fun game. Next is Eastern Kentucky taking on Louisville. Louisville had a 2-10 team last year. They took on number 9 Notre Dame, and they were actually up 14-7 early. They had a lot of fight. They didn't quit in this game. They did lose 35-17, but they showed a lot. Quarterback Jawan passed. He was only 12 of 27 for 134 yards, but he also ran for 67 yards and 2 touchdowns. Javian Hawkins ran for 122 yards, as they ran actually for 234 yards as a team. And, they look better this year. Maybe they could just sneak into a bowl, depending if they play as well as they did against Notre Dame against the other teams, beginning with Eastern Kentucky, which should be a nice win for them. So there's Louisville. BYU taking on Tennessee. BYU, they had the holy war against Utah. They kind of struggled. Utah has a really good defense, good team. They struggled a bit. They only had 92 yards rushing. Quarterback Wilson passed for 208, but he had 2 interceptions. The defense allowed 262 rushing yards, but Tennessee was up to Georgia State. Even though their quarterback Jarek Garantano passed for 311, 2 touchdowns and a pick, they only had 93 rushing yards. Wide receiver Jawan Jennings had 7 catches, 108 and a touchdown. I'm not sure who's going to bounce back in this. This is actually pretty even, so go check out my picks later. All right, Coastal Carolina taking on Kansas. Coastal Carolina, they did lose to Eastern Michigan 30-23. It was about the kind of game I thought it would be. It was pretty close. Coastal Carolina only missed out on a bowl game by 1 game last year, and that was a game they needed. Quarterback Fred Payton did have a pretty good game, 304 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, but he threw 4 interceptions, and that was a huge reason why they lost. They only had 74 rushing yards, but they're taking on Kansas. Kansas head coach Les Miles from LSU and Oklahoma State fame as their head coach. They struggled versus 1AA Indiana State. It was back and forth. Their running back, Puka Williams Jr., didn't play. I think he was suspended, but he should be back, I think. Quarterback Carter Stanley, he was fine. 241 passing, 2 touchdowns. Wide receiver Andrew Parchment, 8 catches, 121. Their defense had 3 sacks, 2 interceptions, and their cornerback named Hassan Defense, great name for a defensive player, had a 57-yard pick 6 in that game. I still think this may be kind of close, but if either team wants to get to a bowl, they got to win. Kansas is 1-0 already, so they might need this. All right, the last game of the 7 o'clock one, then watch my next video for the 7:30 and later games. McNeese State went to take it on Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State beat Oregon State 52-36. It was a bit of a shootout. Redshirt freshman Spencer Sanders, his first start of his career, great. 203 passing yards, 3 touchdown passes, ran for 109 yards. Running back Chuba Hubbard ran for 221 yards and 3 touchdowns. Wide receiver Tylen Wallace had 5 catches, 92 yards and 2 touchdowns. Intro roll there. So watch out for my next video where I start off with an LSU Texas game.